Hello fellow kin, welcome back to the channel and welcome to another unit analysis video. This week, by popular demand at 48% votes, we'll be taking a look at the grandiose Hekaton Land Fortress. In this deep dive video, we're going to first take a look at, well, what is the Hekaton Land Fortress? We're going to figure out how to best equip it, how to best use it, look at some stratagems, some combos you could use with transport, and we'll wrap the video up with some important considerations to keep in mind when you do decide to field this unit. So what is this thing? Well, the Hekaton Land Fortress, or HLF as you'll commonly see abbreviated, is a really durable shooting platform and transport. So it is a vehicle. It's a high threat target with really good weapon options, super customizable, and the role I would say is really focused on primary and being a damage dealer. There are obviously some support contingencies that we'll see here with the ability to being able to provide reroll wounds when a target disembarks, but in general you're not bringing it just for that. You're bringing this thing because this in itself is a very effective unit on the table. So how can we run this? Well, I put on the screen here a little helpful picture of the data card, and what we could see here just to start things off in terms of some of the stats, we have movement speed 10, toughness 12, 2 up base save 16 wounds, leadership 7, and an OC of 5. So right off the bat here, we see that this thing is very durable at T12, 2 up base save 16 wounds, so really hard to shift. It's decently quick at movement speed 10, and it's a little bit annoying if you do park it on an objective because it is OC 5. In terms of loadout, you have quite a few options surprisingly here, and we could break these down by looking at the big weapon options, the smaller weapon options, and then the war gear itself. So for big weapons, we have three choices, being either the cyclic ion cannon, the heavy magma rail rifle, or the SP conversion beamer. For smaller weapons, we have a choice between either 2 ion beamers or 2 bolt cannons, or a mix of one of each. And then lastly, for war gear, we have the option of getting a pan-spectral scanner, which makes every weapon on this target ignore cover, which is very potent. And we also have the choice of sacrificing that ability for a one-time use warhead. It also has a transport capacity of 12, and as many of you are probably familiar with, our Votann range varies quite a bit in terms of how much room our models take in a transport, and so this varies from things like warriors who take up 1 spot each, to characters who sometimes take up 3 because they have their little cogs that are following them around, and these do take up a seat at this time anyway. And we also have some of our heavier units like the Terminators taking up 2 seats, or even our bigger units like the Thunderkin who would take up 3 seats in this case. So you do have some flexibility with how you want to put cargo inside of this transport, but you are somewhat limited in configuration because of these seat sizes that each unit takes up. But again, we'll look at some combos later on in the video. There's also an innate ability that this vehicle provides, and that's that when an infantry or whatever disembarks from it, and you shoot the same target that the Hekaton shot at, you get to re-roll wounds. This is a very good ability. We discussed it more in our last video because it focused on the Hearthguard, who were a pretty big recipient to this buff, and we will touch upon this later in the video again as well. But just keep that in mind for now as we do this little overhead view of the entire package. And so you get all of this that I mentioned for 225 points, which is pretty decently priced. So we know what this thing is, but let's take a look at how we should be running it. And we're going to start things off with the big guns. This fluctuated a lot throughout the edition. I know at the start people were kind of big on magma rail rifles, and now the big focus is on SP conversion beamers. We have seen ions pop up every now and then, but I put the stats here below in a bigger font while we talk through this slide. But the ultimate question is there a right or wrong answer in terms of what we decide to equip these guys with? Are they situational, or is one just simply outright better than the others? Let's find out. Beginning with scenario 1A for the SP conversion beamer, this is a 24-inch gun, 2 attacks, ballistic skill 4+, strength 10, minus 2 AP, 4 damage. In terms of keywords, it has conversion and sustained hits D3. So for those of you who don't know what conversion does, it's that while you're within 12 to 24 inches, well, when your target's within 12 to 24 inches of this gun, you essentially get critical hits on a 4+ instead of a 6+, meaning every time you hit a 4+, you get sustained hits D3. It's really good, and it's honestly pretty fun. For this analysis, we're going to assume that you're targeting a unit that has 2 judgment tokens to get the most value out of this unit, and the weapon is bare bones, meaning we're not incorporating any modifiers such as cover or armor and contempt or any stratagems that would buff the output. So really we're just looking at the amount of unsaved wounds and the raw damage that goes through. And so running the numbers, what we see is that on average, with our sustained hits and our conversion on a 4, we can assume that we'll be hitting 3.33 times. And out of these 3.33 hits, we can see that the wounds translate to 2.78 into targets that are less than T10, 2.22 into targets that are T10 exactly, and 1.67 into targets that are above T10. So toughness 11, 12, 13. Putting this on a table, we get a really nice spread of values here. And for those of you who did not see the first video in the unit analysis series, the way this is designed to be viewed and interpreted is by graphing it as if it's a Cartesian plane. You could basically take any profile in the game and run it with the first column of toughness brackets and assign it a value based on the saves that we see at the top row. And what we get out of comparing those results is we see the total amount of unsaved wounds, which would be the first number in black, and then what that translates to in terms of output raw damage, which is the colored number underneath. And so just for example here, if we looked at something that was T7 with a 3+ base save, we could see where I put a little square in yellow that we're looking at 1.85 unsaved wounds that would go through, resulting in that amount times 4, because the damage characteristic of this weapon is 4, resulting in 7.4 raw damage that goes through. Looking at these numbers, and again, this is just very surface level for now, I want to point out that it looks like the most optimal damage output for the SP conversion beamer is when we shoot at a target that's less than T10 and has either a 2 base, 3 base, or 4 base save. This is where we get the most amount of damage output that goes through. And if you see just to the right of that, when we're looking at the 5+ base save, you might be thinking to yourself, well, hey, how come we didn't mention that? Here we see 11.10 raw damage that goes through. Surely this is much higher. And the reason I didn't include this into the ideal target that we'll be shooting at is because realistically, you will not be shooting this 4 damage shot into a target that has a 5+ base save, because those are targets that will typically be T3 or less. So really, you're not getting the most amount of value. Yes, you'll do a lot of damage, but it's sort of wasted since those will typically be just 1 wound models anyway. So we'll try to focus our attention to realistic target profiles, and because of that, the best output would be the one I highlighted in yellow for a target that's less than T10, because on this example here, we're going to be wounding on 2s. Now, when we introduce targets that are either equivalent in toughness to our strength, so T10, or when we go even higher to something like T11 or T12, we do see a bit of a steep decrease in damage output here, going down from, in this case, 5.5 damage to 4.4 if we were looking at a T10, a 2 base save, or even further reduced at above T10, going down even lower to 3.33. To help illustrate this, think of something like a Rhino profile that's T10 with a 3+ base save. This would land us at 1.48 unsaved wounds that go through. We can estimate on average 5.92 damage, so just barely 6 damage that would go through with this weapon if we shot at a Rhino. So it's okay damage output, but let's see what happens if we introduce an invulnerable save. And so introducing an invulnerable save shows us that, as you can imagine, we do see a decrease in damage when that bracket is hit, because it's affecting the amount of AP that we're able to dish out logically, meaning that we lose some efficiency with our output, and there are more saves that are made. In this case, if I were to draw upon an example such as a Canoptic Doomstalker who would be toughness 8 with a 4+ invulnerable save, we can estimate around 5.55 damage to go through on that target if it has 2 judgment tokens. So this information doesn't really tell us a lot comparatively because we haven't looked at the other weapons yet. So in order to get a better picture as to how well this weapon performs or how poorly it performs, we're going to run some numbers on the other guns to see what we get as a result. Range scenario 1B is where we look at the ion cannon. So the cyclic ion cannon is an interesting weapon. It doesn't really see a lot of play, and it's often overshadowed. So this is another 24-inch range gun, just like with the SP conversion beamer. And it's D6 plus 3 attacks, 4 up ballistic skill, strength 9, minus 2 AP, 2 damage, and it has blast. So a very peculiar weapon profile that we see here. And so for this analysis, we're going to also assume that there are 2 judgment tokens on the targets and that it's bare bones, meaning we're just looking in a vacuum how much damage this weapon profile can do. Running the numbers, we see we'll average around 6.5 shots, which translates to 4.33 successful hits. These 4.33 hits will convert into around 3.61 wounds inflicted onto a target less than T9, 2.89 wounds inflicted to a target that is T9, or 2.17 wounds to a target that is above T9, so T10 or higher. And again, keep in mind this is with 2 judgment tokens, so we are getting that +1 to wound benefit. Putting this together, we get a table that looks like this. And again, same thing here with the spread of values. I highlighted in yellow here one area where we have the biggest numbers, and this is going to be anything that's less than T9 with a 3+, 4+, or 5+ base save. At this range, we can expect to do around 4.81 damage, or 6.01 to something with a 4+, or even 7.22 if we shoot something with a 5+ base save, and with no invulns, obviously. Not too dissimilar from what we saw with the SP Conversion Beamer, being a little bit better into targets that are below its strength characteristic and those that have lower base saves without invulns. But let's see what happens when we compare the two side by side. Putting these two profiles together, we have some very interesting findings. The ion cannon without blast is objectively worse than the SP Conversion Beamer when we look at raw damage output alone. So keep that in mind. The writing in blue for the ion cannon is without blast. We're going to introduce blast later on just to see if this weapon profile gains some merit when we do include that weapon keyword in the results. But for now, no blast. So without blast, the SP Conversion Beamer has significantly more raw damage across every single toughness target and save characteristic. But importantly, and remember this from our last video, that the damage value shouldn't always be taken at face value. We need to consider the amount of unsaved wounds as well, which is the writing in black, because we won't always be shooting into one single high wound count model. However, in those cases where we are, the SP conversion is strictly better. So in what world would the ion cannon actually be a better choice and outperform the SP Conversion Beamer? Let's look at some examples. First up, we have the Humble Intercessor Squad. I put 3 of them here just to pretend that we don't actually have access to Blast. And what we see is, if we run these guys at T4 and a 3+ base save, we see at the top that the SP Conversion Beamer will on average do 1.85 unsaved wounds to your target, and this results in 7.4 damage total. Conversely, with the Ion Cannon, we have 2.41 unsaved wounds that go through, and the raw damage is significantly lower at 4.81. However, because these models are just 2 wounds apiece, it actually doesn't matter that we have more damage that goes through with the SP Conversion Beamer. What's more important is the amount of unsaved wounds that go through. In this case, 2.41 for the Ion Cannon is much better than the 1.85 for the SP Conversion Beamer. And funny enough, the SP Conversion Beamer will kill only 1.85 Primaris Intercessors on average, whereas the Ion Cannon will pick up 2.41 despite having the lower damage output. Let's look at another example. In this case, we'll introduce my trusty Chaos Terminators who made a lot of appearances in my other video. These guys have a really interesting profile because they're T5, base save 2, and a 4+ invulnerable at 3 wounds apiece. Just your classic Terminators. What we see in this situation running the numbers is that we're going to be looking at the first column of numbers here for the 2+ base save and T5 toughness. And so for the SP Conversion Beamer, again, we have fewer unsaved wounds that go through, being only 1.39 in comparison to the Ion Cannon that is clocking in 1.8 unsaved wounds on average, and the damage output is 3.61 versus the SP Conversion Beamer at 5.55. In this case, it doesn't matter that the SP Conversion Beamer has fewer unsaved wounds that go through because we're damage 4 flat, whereas the Ion Cannon is damage 2. So what this means to us is that even if we just get one shot that goes through unsaved with the SP Conversion Beamer at flat 4 damage, we do pick up a Terminator. And so what we see is that on average with the SP Conversion Beamer, we will kill one very solidly. However, with the Ion Cannon, we have between 1 and 2 unsaved wounds that will go through, meaning we potentially might kill one, but it's not guaranteed. When we move into some of these higher toughness targets that you might be shooting these weapons at, the SP Conversion Beamer will always outperform the Ion Cannon, because when we look at these higher toughness units with better saves, what we typically see is that they're usually just one model that have a lot of wounds. In this case, the raw damage output is always going to be fully applied to your target, and so you want to have as much damage as possible go through. It also means we neglect the blast keyword on the ion cannon because it's designed to play into larger squads because it has that keyword, obviously. That's where you get some value. So let's run some numbers and see how much extra value we get by throwing in blast 1 to one of your targets. And so on this screen, what we see is we have the SP conversion beamer profile in green, the ion cannon in blue, and the ion cannon with blast in yellow. And again, just keep in mind that this is looking at targets that are below toughness 9, because anything that's T9 and beyond, as we previously established, is just outclassed by the SP conversion beamer output. And so by process of elimination, when we look at the remaining targets, which are less than T9, typically the intended target for this weapon, the ion cannon, is gonna probably have access to blast 1. Think about things that are squads of 5 with 2 or more wounds. If we want to run the same exact analysis as we previously did with the Primaris intercessors, in this situation what we see is that access to the blast keyword does help increase the amount of unsaved wounds from 2.41 up to 2.78, meaning we have a much higher chance of killing 3 targets than we did at killing just 2.5, meaning we'll pick up on average about 3 Primaris intercessors when we shoot the ion cannon at a squad. Revisiting the Chaos Terminators, what we see interestingly again is that the addition of blast into this squad of 5 obviously does help, but it still means that we're slightly outclassed by the SP conversion beamer because the target has 3 wounds. In this example, we see that going from 1.8 unsaved wounds for the regular ion cannon profile in blue to 2.08 unsaved wounds for the profile with blast in yellow means that we're going to probably get an extra unsaved wound that goes through, resulting in 2 damage. Because these guys are 3 wounds apiece, and we're inflicting 4 damage total, we're still only picking up 1 model. Surely going to pick up 1 model, because it's 2 that go through, but that extra damage is lost, it's wasted. So in this case, it has equivalent output as the SP conversion beamer does, because both will reliably pick up 1 Terminator model. Putting this all together, what we see is that the SP conversion beamer has significantly better damage into low model count, higher wound, high toughness targets. The ion cannon overall has less raw damage output, but because of the amount of unsaved wounds you force on your opponent, you actually wind up getting more value into killing any high model, low toughness, low wound units because you get access to blast. In these very specific instances, you do outperform the SP conversion beamer. Generally speaking, I think you'll get better all-around play with the SP conversion out of these 2 weapon profiles because it just allows you to be a little bit more versatile. I would much rather have the potential to do a dent and do some damage into lower model, high wound count targets than feeling confident in picking up an extra Primaris intercessor model on the table. Before we draw any final conclusions, let's take a look at the last big gun, being the Magma Rail Cannon. The Magma Rail Cannon clocks in at 30-inch range, so 6 inches larger than the other 2 gun profiles we looked at. It has 1 single attack. It's Ballistic Skill 4+, Strength 18, minus 4 EP, D6 plus 6 damage. Now, this is a gun that I call the Fool's Folly, because on paper you look at this, and it looks crazy, right? Obviously, you look at this and you go, okay, there's a lot of good damage output. If I put this into 1 tank, I'll be able to blow it up in a single turn of shooting. But when we look at the numbers in a bit, I'm sure that we'll see that it's actually not that impactful. It's just 1 shot. There are so many instances where that 1 shot just simply won't connect, whether it's because you missed a hit, you missed a wound, or your opponent saves, or once it all goes through, maybe you just roll a 1 on the D6 and then you just did 7 damage instead. I really don't think that it's a good gun, and I call it the Fool's Folly because I think if you bring this to the table, you're convincing yourself that it's good, and then your opponent will also believe that it's good, when really, it's just not anything above mediocre. So both of you effectively think this gun does a lot of damage, when in reality, it probably will never connect. Another important call out is the inclusion of heavy as a keyword. I think this is a little incompatible with running the gun. It kind of just doesn't really make sense to have heavy as an option here. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, wait, if it has heavy, that means if I just don't move it and I shoot into a target, it's as if I have a judgment token on it anyway, so I don't have to allocate my judgment token resources to a bigger toughness target that I want to shoot with my magma rail gun. And yes, that's technically true. However, because it's only one shot and you're strength 18, you're still going to be wounding any worthwhile threat that's T10 or above on a 3. And wouldn't you rather, since it's only one shot, optimize the chances of having that single shot connect by making yourself wounded on 2s instead? And the only way to do that is if they have 2 judgment tokens. So the heavy keyword actually doesn't interact very well with this gun, and it's kind of just wasted. I will say devastating wounds is always nice, and it could be extremely impactful if it spikes, but regardless, we're going to take a look in a second. Maybe I'm being a little too harsh on the profile. We'll let the numbers speak for themselves. I will say what is nice about this weapon profile is that because we're assuming it's wounding everything on 2s with 2 judgment tokens, I only have to put 1 row of numbers, which saved me a lot of time. Now, putting all that together here, we see a very similar spread as we've been looking at before, and be assured that this does include the potential of getting devastating wounds, which I calculated at being 0.11. So I added that in with the amount of successful wounds and ran those against the toughness bracket and the different save characteristics, and this is what we end up getting. And as you'll see, because the shot is so inconsistent at just honestly 0.67 successful hits, meaning you're only going to hit 67% of the time that you shoot with this gun, the actual damage that we can estimate inflicting on average is significantly lower than the profile characteristic itself. So let's test these numbers against some profiles and see what we get. In this first example, we're going to look at a Rogaldorn battle tank, because we all know guard are S tier right now. I'm joking. And so theoretically what we see is that the Rogaldorn battle tank being 2+ base save, T12, results in letting 0.37 unsaved wounds go through, meaning when we multiply this by the D6 plus 6 damage characteristic, we average, theoretically, 4.53 damage to this target. In another example, if we ran this against a War Dog Brigand who has a 3+ base save, 5+ invulnerable at T10, what we see is that because of the 5++ invul that intercepts our AP that's incoming, what we end up with is only 0.29 unsaved wounds that go through, resulting in, on average, 3.83 damage only to the target. Now let's put this side by side with the SP conversion beamer and see how they square up. Now, I excluded the ion cannon from this because the ion cannon, as we already established, is going to be much more effective into lower toughness, lower wound count models, which is antithetical to the whole reason you would bring a magma rail cannon. So I decided to just compare the 2 profiles that have target suitability. And we see some pretty interesting numbers. So right off the bat, what we notice is at anything that's less than T10, we actually wind up getting more damage out of the SP conversion beamer because the reliability of the SP conversion beamer simply outweighs the raw damage potential of the magma rail cannon. However, once we introduce that T10 breakpoint, this is where we actually see the magma take the lead on average, where the damage potential and the extra strength overcomes the increased reliability of the SP conversion beamer, which obviously gives that up at the expense of being a little bit more reliable. In this case, if we compared it back to the Rogaldorn battle tank, we would actually on average do more damage with the magma rail cannon by about 1.20 on average. We see a similar trend for things with a 3+ base save, which would be a large portion of the really big threats at this toughness bracket. What we see though is that the SP is slowly gaining increased damage output across more tougher targets in this save range, as the -2 AP takes things to a much worse save, being a 5+ when we compare it to something saving on base save 2 going to just a 4+ save. What this basically translates to is that at the point of a 3+ base save, it doesn't matter that much that the SP conversion beamer has lower strength and lower damage output, because when we're forcing our opponent to make a worse save, the chances of them failing are significantly higher. So even though at a 3+ base save, the magma rail would just go straight through any saving throws that they have to make, the SP conversion beamer still outperforms it because we have that extra reliability in the number of shots that we're dishing out, resulting in more saving throws having to be made at a worse saving characteristic, and therefore more damage going through. As soon as we hit anything with a 4+ save native, still no invulns, the SP conversion takes the lead across all toughness brackets, as the reliability of the shots weighs significantly more favorably when the target is saving on a 6, despite the AP of the magma not causing the save at all. Basically, it doesn't matter that they're not taking a save with the magma cannon because the SP conversion beamer pushes them to a 6+ save anyway, and it is so unreliable to make a 6+ save that you can expect the reliability of the extra shots to weigh more favorably and have a larger impact on damage taken. This discrepancy is magnified as we introduce invulnerable saves, essentially neutering the damage output of the magma by further reducing its single shot's ability to connect with the target. And introducing the ward dog again, what we see is that the 3.83 damage that we see go through with the magma rail because it gets hit by that 5++ is actually not impactful at all when we look at what happens with the SP conversion beamer, who will inflict 5.92 damage on average, taking us to more damage being put through with this weapon profile, despite having a worse wound roll to make. I went ahead and tried to do a little experiment just to try to make this a little bit more clearer. I put some gray all over the map here, and the goal here was so that we can actually isolate to infer some results based on realistic targets that we'll be shooting into with both of these weapon profiles. And so what we find is actually quite interesting. We could infer from these results that unless your target is T10 plus, and they either have a base save 2 or 3 without an invulnerable save, the SP conversion comes out on top. I also want to point out that in those instances where the SP falls behind, we actually see that it's not by all that much. So what does this all mean for us? Well, it looks like, again, the SP conversion beamer has better all-around play. It outperforms the magma into most targets, surprisingly, especially all targets with an invulnerable save. And this is because the magma cannon is so spiky. Yes, it can spike and you wind up doing a bunch of damage, but on average, the one shot is so inconsistent that it ruins any reliable output going through. I will say that the magma cannon is slightly better into high toughness targets that have a 2+ base save or 3+ base save without any invulnerables. The magma cannon also has slightly better range than the SP conversion beamer, being 6 inches. And depending who you ask, 6 inches may or may not be a lot. The magma cannon can also benefit from heavy, and so I did kind of put it down at the beginning of this analysis by saying that the heavy keyword is a little useless on this weapon profile, but it can obviously come into play if you didn't have any judgment tokens whatsoever available to put on a target because they're all on something else, and you just had to deal with it. Yes, obviously getting native heavy and +1 to hit is going to be better than not benefiting from it at all, but I just think that, even if you have this reduced reliance on tokens to hit, you still want to have the ability to optimize the amount of wounds you do because of the unreliability of this weapon, meaning you probably would like to wound on 2s anyway. Just for fun, I decided to rerun the numbers and see what happens if we take out a second judgment token from the equation, just to see how much more of an impact this has. So without a second judgment token on the target, there's actually a pretty steep drop for both the SP conversion beamer and the magma rail's damage output, really helping to show the impact +1 to wound has on our army's shooting capabilities. Interestingly, the SP conversion beamer actually performs slightly worse now on average at the greater than T10 bracket when we compared to the magma rail into all targets, indicating that wounding on 5s is pretty brutal for this weapon profile. All that said, I still think there's a better use case for bringing the conversion beamer, but it was interesting for me to see that the magma was not as horrible and useless as I thought it was. I still 100% would rather bring the conversion beamer over this gun because I just hate the odds of rolling a single dice, even if there are instances where, theoretically, it can slightly perform better. We looked at a few big guns, and I just want to summarize each one of them real quick and identify when you might want to take one versus the other. Without a doubt, the safest and most reliable output weapon option for your main gun is the SP conversion beamer. It has the most amount of play into the most amount of targets, making it very versatile, and when it does fall behind, it's not by that much. The magma rail rifle is better into higher toughness targets that have a very poor save without invulns, but I'd be very cautious in bringing this because there aren't too many profiles that fit this description, and the gun is so unreliable that you might not actually get it to connect. Lastly, we have the humble ion cannon, and I actually think the ion cannon does have some play, but it's going to be into high infantry meta lists that have a lot of 2-wound infantry that you're trying to take care of. This would ensure that you get the full benefits from your blast keyword, and you optimize the amount of damage that you're dishing out with this weapon's profile. As a final note, in 90% of lists, you should probably take the SP conversion beamer, but I will admit there are some very niche list designs that may warrant other options instead. One example I could give you that's very real, and we saw this in one of our list reviews from a few months ago, was a list that ran 3 Hekaton Land Forts, 2 with an SP conversion beamer and 1 that had an ion cannon. In this case, it makes sense to have one with an ion cannon because when you are eating up so many points towards these tanks, you might be lacking access to smaller arms infantry fire somewhere else, and you need to be able to compensate for that. It can also be very useful to help reduce move blocking potential by being able to dent large infantry squads. Think about something like gargoyles. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that we have a lot of weapon option choices to take for this vehicle, and we just spent some time covering some of the bigger ones. Let's focus on the 2 smaller options being the ion beamers and the bolt cannons. So for these guns, like I said, you basically have the option of taking 2 weapons. And so you can either take 2 bolt cannons, 2 twin ion beamers, or you take 1 of each. Ultimately, it comes down to a question of, do you prefer having more damage or more AP on your gun? Also worth mentioning, and this is very important, is that the ion beamer has half the range of the twin bolt cannon. This is very significant. Walking you through the profiles on the screen real quick, we see twin bolt cannon comes in at sustained hits 1, twin length, 36-inch range, 3 attacks, ballistic skill 4+, strength 6, -1 AP, 2 damage. Whereas the twin ion beamer has sustained hits D3, twin length, 18-inch range, 3 attacks, 4+ ballistic skills, strength 7, -2 AP, and 1 damage. Let's take a look at which weapon comes out on top. For this scenario, we're going to start off with the twin bolt cannon, and again, we're going to always assume that there's 2 tokens on your target just for simplicity, and that the weapon is again bare bones, meaning it's not benefiting from any buffs. Running those numbers gives us a spread that looks like this, and please keep in mind that you can be equipped with 2 bolt cannons, meaning whatever number you see here, just multiply that by 2, and that's what you get if you're running 2 of this weapon profile instead. So this is factoring in the sustained hits, it's factoring in the twin linked, that ability to reroll. And this is what we end up getting for just 1 gun. So again, if you're running 2, just multiply this number by 2 instead. So how does it actually perform? So let's throw some examples on the screen here. Let's look at Deathwing Terminators. So these guys are T5 with a 2+ base save, 4+ invuln. And so if we plug that in at our less than T6 bracket and 2+ base save, we see on average 0.81 unsaved wounds that go through, resulting in 1.62 damage, or timesing that by 2 means we'll be able to pick up 1 Deathwing Terminator model in a round of shooting with 2 of these guns. Now, what happens if we try to shoot at something a little tankier, like a Canoptic Doomstalker? So these guys are T8 with a 3+ base save and a 4+ invuln. And what we see is that we actually end up doing surprisingly similar damage, actually slightly above, despite it being a much tougher target to actually land your wounds on, because the base save is a lot worse than being a 2, it's now at a 3. So our AP, even if it's just 1, is going to be slightly more impactful here. And so what we can expect is 1.88 damage per gun going through, or simply times that by 2 to see the amount of damage you'll do with 2 weapons. Taking a look at the twin ion beamer for scenario 2B, we're going to equally assume that there's 2 judgment tokens on your target and that the weapon is bare bones. Putting it together, we get a nice spread that looks like this. So this weapon profile is just 1 damage apiece. So I didn't bother putting an extra row at the bottom of each damage profile here for unsaved wounds, because the amount of damage it inflicts is just simply equal to the amount of unsaved wounds that go through on average. And so running it against the same targets, for example, the Deathwing Terminator squad, we see that we'll only do 1.46 damage, again multiplied by 2. Or into the Canoptic Doomstalker, we'll do 1.13 multiplied by 2. And putting these together, very interestingly, what we see is that in both instances where the AP is affected, and also where it's not affected because there's invulnerable save, we actually just still do more damage with the twin bolt cannon instead. In fact, what we actually see is that the twin bolt cannon outperforms the twin ion essentially for everything that's below toughness 6, regardless of what the save characteristic is, meaning that the extra point of damage is actually more impactful here than the extra AP. But it's worth noting that when we look at the unsaved characteristics, so the amount of unsaved wounds that go through, it is higher for the twin ion, which means that while the raw damage is lower, if we're shooting into 1 wound models, we're actually going to pick up more with the twin ion. And as you can imagine, when we're shooting at things that are less than T7, there's going to be a nice mix of things that are 2 wounds and also some stuff that is 1 wound. So both profiles might have some play in this scenario. Once we hit the T6 toughness bracket, what we see regardless of save, we actually just do more damage universally with the twin bolt cannon instead. So even if we look at the amount of unsaved wounds that are going through, it doesn't actually matter that much here because most of the targets in this bracket are going to be 2 wounds or more. This discrepancy could get significantly higher when we look at the invulnerable save category because, again, just the impact of neutering the AP on a weapon profile reduces the amount of damage you put through. And so because the twin bolt cannon has less AP, there's a better chance that it's less impacted by invulnerable saves. This trend continues when we look at targets that are T7, where the twin bolt cannon comes out on top in terms of raw damage. Again, we don't really care about the total amount of unsaved wounds because when we enter this bracket, most targets will have at least 2 or 3 wounds because they're T7, meaning that, yes, even if you're getting 1.78 or 2.67 wounds that go through, the raw damage of 3.13 comparatively for a target that's T7 at a 5+ base save for the twin bolt cannon will actually just do more damage overall. There really aren't that many instances where the ion cannon outright outperforms the twin bolt cannon. In fact, we only see this happen at these specific instances here that I highlighted. And this is where we're at that T7 2+ base save because -1 AP would only take you to a 3 with the twin bolt cannon versus the ion cannon, which will take you to a 4+, so you'll just natively save half and fail half. So a little bit more impactful here having the extra AP at such a native base save that's much lower, being 2+. It also looks like the ion cannon has much more better output when we compare anything that's at or above toughness 12. Because in this case, the twin bolt cannon is actually going to be hurt really badly by that bracket where it would wounding everything on 4, whereas the T7 ion, which would wound on 5s, is now going to wound on 4s instead. So you do get a little bit more value if you're shooting at a tough target that's T12 or higher with the twin ion cannon. Conversely, when we throw in invulnerable saves, we actually see that the twin bolt cannon surprisingly takes the lead and does significantly better. This is because I suppose the weight of 2 damage shots are simply much more impactful here than any AP that would be hindered by the invulnerable save. So when we put these together, our decision is actually a little bit more easier than with the big guns. The twin bolt cannon nearly always outperforms the twin ion. It has more range, it has more damage, it has more targets, and I really think the range here is super important because even in a meta where you want to have the twin ion because you're hoping to take care of a lot of low toughness, single wound infantry, just being at 18 inches is such a penalty compared to the 36 you get with the twin bolt cannon. Now, I will say that as you can imagine, having that extra AP might be impactful if your opponent is benefiting from cover. But if you recall at the beginning of the video, I mentioned that the wargear options, which we're going to talk about right now, give you the choice between a scanner, which ignores cover for all your guns, or a one-shot missile warhead. Before we even run any numbers or delve into the analysis, cover is important. It is very accessible this edition, and being able to ignore cover on all your weapons for the whole game versus a one-time missile, I can't help but innately feel a bias towards wanting to take the scanner over the warhead every single time because the warhead is just a once-a-game shot. Now, how do we even measure the value in this? Well, we're going to need to see if the damage output of this one-time shot warhead missile is going to outperform the aggregated damage lost that we're negating by ignoring cover throughout the game. Answering the question of, does the damage of the warhead outperform the benefit of cover? I want to start it off by looking at the typical loadouts we covered and analyze them versus your opponent having access to cover. So in this case, it's still 2 judgment tokens, but your opponent gets the benefit of cover. And we're going to compare pre-cover and post-cover damage to see how much damage we lose if they have access to it. For the purpose of this analysis, we're going to only be looking at 2 of the main weapon profiles. So we're going to look at the SP conversion beamer, and we're going to look at the twin bolt cannon. The reason being is that we've previously established that these are the weapons that are the most versatile, and so these are going to be taken 90% of the time. And just for the purpose of keeping this video relatively contained, we're going to look at just the SP conversion beamer and the twin bolt cannon for this analysis. Starting off with the SP conversion beamer, at the top here we have the weapon profile into a target that does not have cover, so what we saw before, and then at the bottom of the screen we have how those damage outputs are impacted if our target does benefit from cover. And so what I did here was I eliminated the invulnerable saves, because these invulnerable saves have no interaction with cover if they're being triggered. And so what we see is that by averaging both of these tables and then taking the difference between the two, we see that on average we lose about 1.48 damage if our opponent has cover and we are shooting with the SP conversion beamer. And again, keep in mind please that this is a spread average over the entire range of targets that are illustrated on this screen. Now, next up, I did the exact same thing with the twin bolt cannon. So at the top, I have the typical loadout that we saw before with the spread into something that does not benefit from cover. And then at the bottom here, I modified the results so that we see what that spread looks like if our target does benefit from having cover. And so here, it does look to be slightly more impactful, obviously because there's only one AP on this weapon profile. But ultimately, what we get as a result is that by comparing the average of all the data in both tables, we lose about 0.66 damage. And this is for one twin bolt cannon, so just one of them. And since we have two, I simply multiplied that damage by 2. And so what we get is a loss net of 1.32 damage because we're shooting into cover with both of these guns. So tallying everything up, we have our main gun, which is at 1.48 damage lost, and our two small guns, which is at 1.32 damage lost. And when I add these together, we get around 2.8 damage lost total per round of shooting into cover, if we're not ignoring it. On the screen here, I have a screenshot of the weapon profile for the Warhead. And what we see, it's a 36-inch range gun, D6 plus 3 attacks, ballistic skill 4, strength 7, minus 2 AP, 2 damage. It does benefit from blast, it has indirect fire, and it is one shot. You can only shoot it once per battle. For the purposes of this assumption, we're going to assume that there's no indirect penalty being applied because we're going to give it the benefit of having the most amount of damage output, and we're going to pretend that there are 2 judgment tokens on our target. The first example we see here is if we're shooting at something and we do not have access to blast. I did run the numbers for blast, and to save time, I'll just include that in the end summary result, but what we see without access to blast is a nice spread that looks something like this. And so when I average the table to see how much damage we get across the entire spread of targets, what we get is 4.12 damage on average across all brackets or all possible targets in the game. And putting these together in our summary screen, we see that the Warhead deals, on average without blast, 4.12 damage across all targets, or 4.76 damage with access to blast. And so we have two relatively comparable numbers here. Now that we have our data, we can ask the question, how often does the land fort shoot? So just looking at this without doing any math, if we assume that your land fort is going to only shoot one time per game, you are going to just lose 2.8 damage if you don't have ignore cover, and assuming that you're shooting something in cover. So if you're shooting this gun one time per game into something with cover, you are going to lose out 2.8 damage. And in this case, the Warhead, it's more worth it to take it because you're going to be doing either 4.12 damage across all targets or 4.76 damage across all targets with blast on average. So if you are only going to shoot your land fort one time per game into cover, then yes, take the Warhead. However, this is not realistic. Even under extremely conservative estimates of only 2 turns of shooting into cover, we still do 2.8 times 2 is equal to 5.6 damage. So as long as throughout the entire 5 rounds of the game, you are shooting into something in cover twice, at least, you will lose out on 5.6 damage, which is much more than the Warhead's once per game benefit of 4.12 damage or 4.76 due to blast. So as long as you're shooting something in cover more than once, it's just not worth taking the Warhead. Ignore cover is way more valuable than having access to the Warhead. The only world where I could see the Warhead being taken is if you're considering using a magma rail loadout, because the cover won't really impact you all that much when you're minus 4 AP on your weapon profile. However, it still hurts your output at base 2 and base 3 saves, which means you're going to be making your unreliable weapon even more unreliable by taking this. You're also still hurting your small arms fire even if you take a magma rail and you want to have the Warhead missile, because you will end up shooting multiple times throughout the game with this vehicle. As a result of that, unless you plan on shooting your Hekaton only once per game, take the spectral scanner and ignore cover. Now that we've established how to equip our land fort, let's talk a little bit about how to actually use them. So the land fort has excellent mid-range threat, it's extremely durable, very solid damage output, and it's quite hard to shift. As a result of that, you really want to use this as a mid-board threat by being able to push and threaten the center of the table. It also allows your units that are inside of it to properly stage because they're protected and you can get them into a really ideal spot without being too worried about the vehicle dying. It's also quite decently priced, honestly. And when you consider that the prices of Sagittars went up quite a bit and it's now more expensive to take 2 Sagittars than it is to take 1 Hekaton Land Fortress, the Hekaton looks quite appealing. A lot of people have success just running 1 in a list. I actually personally prefer running 2. This is personal preference, of course, but I do feel like it's a good enough threat to actually warrant taking more than 1, and I've seen some people run 3. It ultimately depends on what kind of list you're trying to design and where you want to have your platforms established, but I do think using this or using even 2 of them is going to be pretty staple going forward until there's another points change. It's also multi-use with transport capacity like we touched upon throughout the video, and this is really good because like I said, it allows you to stage, but it also allows you to bring more threats reliably to wherever you need them to be. Yes, you can have your units in deep strike, but it might be a lot harder for you to land if your opponent is properly screening you out. Similarly, let's say you want to break some Thunderkin up, they're a little bit slow, but if you have 3 in this transport, you might be able to get to where you want to be. On the topic of transport, I want to look at some of the combos you can use with your package that will be delivered inside of this transport. And side note, I know I say transport a lot. This isn't a dedicated transport. It's a vehicle that has transport access, so you can totally take this thing without putting anything inside. But, you might as well put something inside if you get good use value out of it. The first example is the most common, and this is an E-Champ with 5 Hearthguard, each equipped with Vulcanites. This is a pretty devastating combination as we saw in our last unit analysis video because it benefits from reroll wound rolls for your devastating wound weapons. This means you get out of the land fort, you shoot something at shot, and now suddenly you're able to fish for even more devastating wounds. This is a pretty standard use package. It's something that a lot of people have experience running, and it's very effective. It's a good, strong combo. It's reliable because you get reroll charge rolls from your E-Champ, you get some extra damage on the charge, and your Hearthguard pack an absolute punch when you amplify the damage output of their Vulcanites. You can likewise interact with even more combos here, as we discussed in the last video, by introducing the Sustained Hits 2 stratagem on this unit so that you're getting even more hit rolls that are thrown into your wound pool to fish for more devs. Just a really good combo. We also have the option of going for something a little bit more utility-based, and this could be quite flexible as we discussed because we have varying models in our range that have varying transport size restrictions. And so on this screen, for example, I put the Grimnir with his 2 drones. These actually count as 3 models for the purposes of transport. I also put on the side the Thunderkin, so each one of these counts as 3 as well. So in theory, you could actually put both 1 squad of 3 Thunderkin and an independent Grimnir with his 2 drones inside of a Hekaton Land Fort, and this allows you to be a little bit more flexible. So you can have a mid-board threat if you want to pop some vehicles with the 3-man squad of Thunderkin, and you also have an independent character here who could try to hop out and put a little bit more of OC on an objective, or maybe try to score you a secondary, or just be a little annoying. Similarly, we also have a tech-heavy focus for transports, and what we see here is basically just an emphasis on scoring with cheap characters and a 5-man warrior squad. So this is quite nice for secondary trading because we just don't care if these guys die. We bring our land fort somewhere that we need to be, probably towards the middle, and we could just throw these little cheap units out to either score something important for secondaries if we are worried about our opponents blowing them off the table, or if we need to just quickly stack some OC with our troop choice here and just make sure that we end up stealing the primary from our opponent. This next combo is something I haven't tried yet, but we actually saw it in our most recent list analysis review, and I think it's actually brilliant. So what we have here is a really good staging capability with this transport. And what we use is we put 2 squads of berserks inside. Each squad is going to be equipped with either the same weapon profile, or you could do one of each, so either axes or mauls or just both. And what you get is the ability to set up a really easy and reliable staging threat, because your transport is going to make it to the middle of the table. It likely will make it behind cover, and you could sit there for a turn and then disembark and have these units clear anything that comes next to it, or clear the middle of the table, or take care of any high threat targets. You also have really good counter charge capabilities. This is great because you want to be able to threaten objectives, you want to be able to set up charges reliably, and you want to make sure that you have the tools to answer any demands your opponent throws at you. Or it also puts the threat that they can't just leave an objective unprotected. In terms of stratagems, there are only really 3 that I would see use for, and these are strats that impact your output value, your toughness, and your movement. So we have reactive reprisal, void armor, and ordered retreat specifically. Starting off with reactive reprisal, this is a really powerful stratagem. It allows you to shoot back after you've been shot. It's really good because it allows you to bypass certain rules that only take effect in your opponent's shooting phase. For example, Necrons, Canoptic Court, you can't shoot them out of 12 inches during the shooting phase. Well, guess what? It's not the shooting phase. You shoot me, I shoot you back. It's really good. It works for all the ranged weapons that you have equipped, and it just allows you to get a little bit more value out of your unit, either before it goes down, because 2 things are going to be shooting at it that turn, or if you want to set yourself up to wound something so significantly that another unit could clean it up in your shooting phase next turn, while this transport does something else instead. Just do be mindful of your range. You are only 24 inches, so you want to make sure that you've set yourself up properly, and you are going to actually be able to be in range to shoot back at the target that shot you. Void Armor is another staple pick here. It's an S tier stratagem. We spoke about it a little bit in the last video, but there's immense defensive value, and it stacks quite nicely because it also stacks with cover, which means you're crazy tough. You're a T12 body with a 2-up base save and 16 wounds. You are absolutely obnoxious to shift with this if you are in cover. So you don't have to be afraid to be a little bit more vulnerable for your vehicle if it's going to benefit you for staging or for getting to somewhere quickly. Just keep in mind that you have access to this tool to really make you a tough model to move. Ordered retreat is another good stratagem that could be useful here. It allows you to fall back, shoot, and charge. And you could put this on your transport or your Hekaton Land Fortress because it helps you get out of tagged situations. Let's say something charges you, gets into combat, you just don't want to deal with it. Well, use this stratagem, fall back, and now you could shoot that, or you could shoot something else without a penalty for -1 to hit, and it just frees you up to get a better position, move around the board a little bit more, and just open up some more target options. I want to call out Ancestral Sentence here because it's important to note that sure, you could add the sustained hits to your weapons, but it does not stack with anything else that's innately sustained already. In this case, it's not really an appropriate stratagem to use. It could maybe have some niche cases depending on which primary weapon profile you're running on the vehicle, or if you really want to have sustained hits 2 instead of sustained hits 1, but just be mindful of this and be careful, as there may be more appropriate targets. To wrap the video up, I just want to leave you off with some careful considerations to keep in mind for when you do decide to run this unit. The first one is don't forget your ranges. It's a really good shooting platform, but it's actually quite mid-range, so most of your profiles are going to be 24 inches to 36 instead, and just be mindful of this, especially if you're running the SP conversion beamer, because there is a cutoff point of 12 to 24 inches for you to benefit fully from your conversion keyword. At 225 points, this thing is quite an investment, and it does do a lot of damage. Your opponent can't really ignore it, so don't be afraid to invest stratagems into this unit if it's going to keep you alive a little bit longer, or just be a nuisance on the board and need to get a little bit more value out of your points. I mentioned that the unit is quite durable, and it is. It can definitely take a round of shooting, and because of this, you want to not be too cautious with how you use these. Sure, you don't want to run it down the middle and just die in one turn, but you should be receptive to being a little bit more vulnerable with this if it'll allow you to get some proper staging or commit to a primary a lot easier. An interesting note to consider is that 2 Sagittars now cost more than 1 Hekaton Land Fortress, meaning you could actually get a little bit more value out of running these compared to spamming Sagittars if you were looking for an alternative. So maybe consider this when you're designing some of your lists, play around with it a bit, and yes, you lose out on the scout move, which is always very impactful, but I honestly think it might be worth it considering you still get the added transport capacity and you're able to just have a really strong shooting platform that's extremely durable on the table. Another consideration is to consider your cargo. Think about what you're putting inside of this vehicle and think about why you're putting it there and what you're trying to use it for. We went over some combos really quickly, but maybe see if there's something in there that resonates with you and your list design, and maybe something you think that would be a little bit more helpful in your games, and make use of this to its full efficiency. The last point I'll bring up, and this is a little bit more general, but I think it's quite applicable here as well. Know when to trade. It's 225 points. It does do quite a lot of damage, and it's quite tanky. So make sure you're getting the most amount of value out of this, and make sure you're trading favorably with it as well. It's a very dangerous distraction piece to ignore, and your opponent will try to put this thing down when it sees it. They simply can't ignore it. So make sure you're trading favorably and you're setting yourself up for success. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching, and sorry for putting this one out a little bit later. These videos are actually taking a lot longer than I thought they would to produce. Every time I think I have it down to 30 minutes, I look at the time and I've been talking for over an hour, and there is quite a lot of editing to do and math to run. If you enjoyed this content, please leave me a like and a subscribe below. Leave a comment as well. I always try to answer as many comments as I can because I love interacting with you guys and hearing your feedback and your experiences with the army as a whole. Alright guys, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.